Here's how it all began. My wife, Kaylee, and I had been together for quite some time before things really started shifting. She landed this incredible job offer at a top-tier law firm. Seriously, a huge opportunity. At the time, we were living in a small, cozy town, and life wasn't bad. I had my job, my friends, and family nearby, pretty standard stuff. But Kaylee, she was always hustling, always talking about making partner, advancing her career, and becoming somebody. Of course, I supported her. What kind of husband wouldn't? But when she got this position in another city, everything changed. She was ecstatic, like over the moon happy, but I felt like I was being torn away from everything I knew, my family, my friends gone. I didn't voice that, though I didn't want to be the guy holding her back. After all, we were a team, or at least that's what I believed. So we packed up, left everything behind, and moved to this big city. It was overwhelming, to say the least, and as soon as we arrived, I felt like I didn't even know Kaylee anymore. She plunged into her work like she was drowning in it late nights. Endless talk about the partners, constantly immersed in legal documents. I'd see her at the end of the day, but she felt miles away. Meanwhile, I was struggling. Finding a job in a new city is a lot tougher than people think. I applied everywhere, went on a few interviews, and after what seemed like forever, I finally secured a job at a marketing firm. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills. The only issue was my boss, Trevor. Trevor was a nightmare. He nitpicked everything I did, like nothing was ever good enough. He'd call me into his office, give me that condescending look, and point out every little mistake. I tried my best to make it work, but it was tough. Especially when I'd come home and see Kaylee excelling in her career, while I was stuck with this jerk of a boss. It was like some sort of cruel joke. And Kaylee, she was changing too. At first, I brushed it off. Her job was intense, and I understood that. She was coming home late, exhausted. I tried to be patient. I'd cook dinner, even though I'm not much of a chef, and I'd try to have conversations like we used to. But she wasn't interested. There were nights when she'd come home, eat in silence, and then go straight back to work on her laptop, barely acknowledging I was there. I told myself it was just work stress, that she had worked so hard to get where she was, and this was the price of success. But something felt off. It wasn't just her job that was keeping her distracted, it felt like she was pulling away from me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see her on her phone or laptop, typing away, not even noticing I was next to her. We started talking less, that we almost stopped talking altogether. The woman I'd married, the one I used to laugh with and share everything with, was slowly disappearing in front of my eyes, and I had no idea how to stop it. It felt like an invisible wall was going up between us, brick by brick, and I couldn't find a way to break through. The worst part. I didn't even know how to bring it up. What was I supposed to say? Hey, you're acting distant, and I feel like I'm losing you. Yeah, that sounded pathetic. So I kept it all bottled up, convincing myself that maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid. She was working hard for us, right? For our future. That's what I told myself every single day. But despite all the self-talk, I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. We were supposed to be a team, but it felt like I was playing this game on my own. And then there were the comparisons. I couldn't help it. Kaylee was moving up, making waves at her firm, probably getting noticed by all the right people. And me? I was getting chewed out by Trevor daily, barely keeping my head above water. It started eating away at me. I was supposed to be proud of her, happy for her success, but it was hard to feel that way when my own life felt like it was unraveling. Every time I saw Kaylee, so driven, so focused, I felt small, like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't man enough. And it wasn't her fault, not directly. She never said anything to make me feel that way, but actions speak louder than words, don't they? She was laser-focused on her career, and I felt like I was just along for the ride, the husband tagging along, hoping to catch some crumbs of success. There were nights I thought about sitting her down, having a real conversation about what was happening between us. But then she'd come home, exhausted and still glued to her laptop, and I'd back off. She didn't need me adding more stress to her plate. She didn't need me complaining about how I felt when she had deadlines and cases to worry about. So I just let it go, but inside, it was eating me alive. I knew something was wrong, I just didn't know what. Or maybe I did know, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Because once you admit something's wrong, it's out there, you can't take it back. And that's where things stood me, in a city I didn't want to be in, working a job I didn't enjoy, with a wife who was slipping away from me, but at that point, I still held on to hope. Silly, right? I still believed things would turn around. I thought that maybe, once Kaylee settled into her new role, we'd reconnect. I convinced myself it was just a phase and that the distance between us would eventually close. Little did I know, the worst was still ahead. The holidays were approaching, and the company I worked for decided to throw a big corporate party or typical end-of-year celebration. Attendance was pretty much mandatory, and everyone was expected to bring their spouse. I thought maybe this would be my chance to get back on good terms with my boss. Trevor had been on my case for months, and I figured if I could show him that I had my personal life in order, maybe he'd cut me some slack. Plus, I thought bringing Kaylee along would help us reconnect. Things had been tense at home, and I hoped the party could be a chance to hit the reset button. Kaylee wasn't exactly excited when I asked her to come. She gave me that familiar look, the one that said she was already swamped. She mentioned her deadlines and how busy she was at work, which wasn't news to me. She'd been glued to her laptop day and night, and it seemed like all we ever talked about were her cases. I pressed her a little, suggesting that it would be good for us to spend some time together outside the house. She hesitated but eventually agreed. Honestly, I felt relieved. I needed this. When the night of the party arrived, I was nervous, but not because of Kaylee, it was because of Trevor. He had been a nightmare since I started working there, constantly tearing my work apart. I just hoped to get through the evening without him criticizing everything I did, and I'd consider that a win. When we got to the party, the place was packed. People were already tipsy, laughing too loudly, and fake smiles were plastered on for the photos. It was one of those events where everyone pretended to like each other because the boss was around. I grabbed Kaylee a drink and tried introducing her to some of my co-workers, but she wasn't all that interested. I couldn't really blame her, she didn't know these people, and it wasn't her type of event. Still, I was hoping she'd relax as the night went on. At one point, I went to grab more drinks, and I was gone for maybe 5 minutes. When I returned, I saw Kaylee standing there, chatting with Trevor. I don't know why, but my stomach instantly knotted up. It wasn't like they were doing anything out of the ordinary, just talking. But there was something about the way she was smiling at him, laughing at whatever he was saying. It didn't sit right with me. I walked over, trying to stay cool, and as soon as I got there, Trevor flashed this greasy smile and said, "You've got a wonderful wife, Jacob." It was meant as a compliment, I suppose, but the way he said it. I don't know, something about it felt off, like he knew something I didn't. I brushed it off, because what was I supposed to do? Confront him over a compliment? I forced a smile, made some small talk, and we moved on, but that uneasy feeling stuck with me for the rest of the evening. After the party, things started to get strange. For one, Trevor's behavior toward me at work shifted completely. The guy who had constantly criticized me suddenly became my biggest supporter. He stopped nitpicking my work and even began praising my ideas during meetings. It was like I could do no wrong in his eyes. Then, one day, out of the blue, he called me into his office and offered me a promotion, just like that. I should have been thrilled, and on the surface I was. But something about it felt too easy, too convenient. I hadn't done anything special to deserve it. Despite my nagging doubts, I let myself get caught up in the success. After months of struggling and feeling like I was barely treading water, I was finally being recognized. For the first time since we moved to the city, things were looking up for me. I convinced myself I deserved it. I had worked hard for this. But while my career was on the rise, my relationship with Kaylee was falling apart. Kaylee was becoming more distant than ever. She stopped talking to me about her day, about her cases, and when I'd ask how things were going, her answers were vague and short, like she didn't want to talk to me anymore. It wasn't just our conversations that were disappearing, our entire relationship felt like it was slipping away. She spent more time at work, and when she was home, she was constantly on her phone or laptop. Some nights, she wouldn't even come to bed until after midnight. Whenever I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off, telling me she was busy or that I was overthinking things. But I knew something was off. It wasn't just the job that was pulling her away. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way Trevor had looked at her at the party, or maybe it was how distant Kaylee had been acting ever since. I didn't know exactly what was wrong, but I knew something was up. I had no proof, nothing concrete to go on, but that feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Every time she stayed late at work, every time she avoided my questions, that feeling got worse. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my new promotion and how things were finally going well for me at work, but that nagging doubt was always there, and when you start doubting someone you love, it eats at you like a poison. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where Kaylee was, what she was doing, and who she was with. I'd hear her phone buzz in the middle of the night and wonder if it was a work email or something else. I hated myself for thinking like that, but I couldn't stop. The worst part was, I didn't know how to confront her. I had no solid evidence, and if I asked her outright, she'd just say I was being paranoid. Maybe I was, but that feeling wouldn't leave me alone. So I kept quiet. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that it would pass. I focused on my job, my promotion, anything to distract myself from the doubts. But no matter how hard I tried to push it aside, the distance between us kept growing, and I knew deep down that things were only going to get worse. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought inviting Trevor and his wife, Melissa, over for dinner might ease some of the tension I'd been feeling for weeks. It seemed like the perfect way to put my doubts to rest. If I could get Trevor in my home, watch him interact with Kaylee, maybe I'd realize I was just being paranoid. Plus, it was a chance to strengthen my relationship with my boss. If I could keep things smooth and professional at work, maybe everything else would start falling into place. Kaylee wasn't excited about hosting. "You know how busy I am, Jacob," she said in that tone, the one that made it seem like I was the unreasonable one. But I managed to convince her. I needed this dinner to happen. When the night of the dinner finally came, everything seemed normal at first. I greeted Trevor and Melissa at the door, doing my best to stay casual, though inside I was mentally tallying every glance and word exchanged. Kaylee was the perfect hostess, smiling, offering drinks, and chatting easily with Melissa. For a brief moment, I let myself believe that everything was fine, that I was just being paranoid. But as the evening progressed, I began noticing little things. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. Trevor would occasionally look at Kaylee, not in a normal, friendly way, but with a look that seemed to carry some secret, like they shared something unspoken. And Kaylee wasn't exactly subtle either. Their conversations flowed too smoothly, like they were in sync in a way that made my stomach twist. They kept steering the conversation back to each other, talking about work, cases, their shared ambitions, while Melissa and I were little more than background noise. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was all in my head. After all, I didn't have any real proof. After Trevor and Melissa left, I asked Kaylee how she thought the night went. She gave me a nonchalant "it was fine," then went straight back to her laptop like nothing had happened. I just sat there, watching her, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. She was physically there, but it felt like she was already gone. Everything our trust, our connection was slipping away, and I could feel it. A few days later, Trevor didn't show up to work. Normally I wouldn't have thought much of it, but my mind was already running wild. I sent him a quick email about some project details but didn't get a reply. Around lunchtime I realized it was my turn to pick up our daughter from school, but with work piling up, I called Kaylee to see if she could go instead. I dialed her number and waited. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. That gnawing feeling I had been trying to suppress came rushing back, hitting me like a punch in the gut. My head spun with thoughts I didn't want to think, and my heart raced as if I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't turn back from. When I got home that evening, Kaylee was already in bed. Our daughter was asleep, and the house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. It was chaotic, filled with the worst possible scenarios. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to stop wondering and finally uncover the truth. I walked into our bedroom, heart pounding. Kaylee was asleep, her phone charging on the nightstand. I stood there, staring at it, my hands shaking. I had never done this before, never even thought about violating her privacy like this, but something inside me snapped. I had to know. I picked up her phone, unlocked it, and went straight to her messages. My hands trembled so much I could barely hold it. Then I found them. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the texts between her and Trevor, flirty, explicit, and cruel. They weren't just talking, they were mocking me. Trevor had the audacity to call me a fool, as if I didn't deserve my own wife. And Kaylee? She didn't defend me. She laughed. She joked about how easy it was to keep everything hidden from me. Trevor bragged about how great it felt to be with her and mentioned they had to be careful at work, but it was worth the risk. Kaylee responded with playful emojis and flirtatious comments that made my stomach turn. In that moment, my world collapsed. The ground fell away beneath me, and I felt like I was free falling, helpless. I had been blind all those months. Every doubt I had ignored was right in front of me, undeniable proof that the woman I loved, the woman I sacrificed everything for, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake her up and demand answers. I wanted to throw her phone against the wall, shattering it just like she had shattered my trust, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the need for control. I don't know, but instead of confronting her then and there, I chose to play it smart. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I put her phone back exactly where I found it and quietly left the room. My heart was still racing, but now it wasn't just hurt or anger, it was something darker, something that whispered, "Don't show your hand yet." I needed time. I needed a plan. If Kaylee and Trevor thought they could get away with this, they were in for a rude awakening. I went downstairs, my mind already churning, thinking about what to do next. I wasn't going to be the fool they laughed at. I wasn't going to let them play me. No, I was going to make them regret it. The morning after I found those texts, I sat in the kitchen, staring into my coffee like it would somehow give me the answers I needed. My thoughts were racing, trying to figure out what my next move should be. Part of me wanted to confront Kaylee right then, throw everything out in the open. But that wouldn't solve anything. It would just give her and Trevor a chance to cover their tracks. I needed something bigger, something that would leave them no room to escape, and that's when it hit me: Melissa. Trevor's wife. If I was going to take them down, I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who had just as much to lose as I did. Melissa had no idea what was happening behind her back, or at least that's what I thought at the time. I sent her a message that morning asking if we could meet. I kept it vague, saying it was about work. She agreed, probably assuming I wanted to talk about Trevor or some boring office matter. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, somewhere out of the way where we wouldn't run into anyone familiar. The last thing I needed was for word to get back to Kaylee before I was ready. When I arrived, Melissa was already seated at a small table by the window, looking as put together as ever. She was one of those women who always seemed to have her life in perfect order. But as I sat down and looked into her eyes, I could tell she was already on edge. Maybe Melissa had sensed it too, the way we all do when something's wrong in our marriages, but what I was about to show her would shatter everything. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were trembling beneath the table. This was it. Once I started, there was no going back. She gave me a polite smile, but there was a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Of course, is everything okay?" I didn't waste time. I pulled out my phone, opened the messages, and slid it across the table. "You need to see this." Melissa glanced down, her brow furrowing as she scrolled through the texts. At first, she didn't react. It was as if her mind couldn't process what she was reading. Then her expression changed: shock, followed by anger. "He's been with her," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "How long has this been going on?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But now I have proof." She leaned back in her chair, blinking hard, trying to keep from breaking down in the middle of the cafe. "I've had a feeling," she admitted after a long pause. "Trevor's been distant for months, but I never had anything concrete. Until now." We sat in silence for a while, not the uncomfortable kind, but the type where both people are trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of something that's just fallen apart. And then something shifted. I saw it in her eyes, the same determination I had felt the night before, when I decided I wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. She wasn't just sad anymore, she was furious. "We can't let them get away with this," she said, her voice low but firm. I nodded, feeling my own anger rise again. I've been thinking the same thing. We need a plan. That's when she suggested it: the hidden cameras. It was brilliant. They thought they were so clever, carrying on their affair behind our backs, but if we could catch them in the act, we'd have undeniable proof, not just some texts, but hard evidence. "We'll install cameras in both houses," Melissa said, her voice sharp with resolve. "In our bedrooms, that's where they think they're safe. We'll catch them there." I was all in. This wasn't just about confronting Kaylee anymore. It was about taking control, about making sure they couldn't weasel their way out of it. It wasn't going to be easy, but I didn't care. They had betrayed us, humiliated us, and we were going to make sure they paid for it. We spent the rest of the day planning, going over every detail. That afternoon we bought the cameras, small, discreet, easy to hide. Melissa was cold and calculating as we worked out the logistics, and I knew she was just as determined as I was, maybe even more so. Later that night, I installed the camera in our bedroom. I felt sick to my stomach doing it, but there was no other choice. Every part of me hated that it had come to this, spying on my own wife in our home, but I knew it was the only way to get the proof I needed. I kept my composure around Kaylee, pretending everything was normal, even though inside I was boiling with anger. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Every night, I went to bed wondering if tonight would be the night they slipped up. I had to act like everything was fine, had to keep up the facade, all while knowing that at any moment my marriage could be destroyed. Melissa and I stayed in touch, updating each other on small details, but mostly we just waited. And waited. It was torture. Then, finally, it happened. One night, after weeks of agonizing silence, I got a notification from the camera. Kaylee was home, but I wasn't. My heart pounded as I opened the app and saw them, Kaylee and Trevor, in our bedroom. I couldn't watch for long, it was too much. But I didn't need to. I had all the proof I needed. I immediately called Melissa. She was already checking her own camera footage, and sure enough, Trevor had been at their house that same day, sneaking around with Kaylee in their bedroom too. It was almost poetic, in a twisted, disgusting way. We met the next day, at the same cafe. But everything felt different. We weren't just the betrayed spouses anymore, we were partners now, co-conspirators. We had the evidence. Now, we had to decide what to do with it. "I've got the footage," I said, sliding my phone across the table again. Melissa nodded, her expression hard. "So do I. Now what?" I leaned back, taking a deep breath. "Now, we make them regret ever thinking they could get away with this." We spent hours going over the plan. There were a million ways it could go wrong, but I didn't care. I was done thinking rationally. I wanted revenge, and I wanted them to feel every ounce of the pain they had caused us. When we left the cafe that day, we had a clear goal. It wasn't going to be pretty, but it was necessary. They had destroyed everything we thought we had, and now they were going to face the consequences. The hotel room felt cold, even though it was just a standard business suite with neutral decor and the faint smell of cleaning products. I wasn't sure what I expected when Melissa suggested we meet here, but we both knew it was neutral ground. There were too many emotions tied to our homes, and we needed a place detached from the chaos to think clearly, or at least, that was the plan. Melissa sat across from me, the weight of everything we'd been through hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. We had everything now, the footage, the proof. It was only a matter of time before Kaylee and Trevor faced the consequences. Melissa poured us both a drink, whiskey, no ice. I wasn't a big drinker, but at that moment it felt like a necessary escape. "To freedom," Melissa said, raising her glass, her eyes gleaming with something I hadn't seen in her before. It wasn't happiness, or even relief. It was something darker. Maybe vindication, but also pain, raw and deep. "To freedom," I echoed, though the word felt hollow. I wanted out of this mess, out of the betrayal, but the idea of freedom still felt distant. The whiskey burned on the way down, but I barely noticed. We talked for a while, reviewing the plan one last time. The videos would be uploaded anonymously, sent to a secure site, and shared with the right people. It wouldn't take long for it to spread. Soon, everyone would know about Trevor and Kaylee's affair. Their careers, their reputations, everything they had built would crumble, just like they had done to us. As we talked, though, something began to shift. The whiskey blurred the edges of my thoughts, and I felt the tension between Melissa and me change. It wasn't just about our shared anger or the need for revenge anymore. It was something deeper, more primal. We poured another round of drinks, and then another. I wasn't keeping track anymore, and neither was she. We were both running on fumes, months of betrayal, humiliation, and frustration boiling just beneath the surface. The alcohol brought it all to the surface, making us raw and exposed. I could see it in her eyes, that familiar mix of hurt and anger, and I knew she saw it in mine too. At some point, Melissa moved closer. Her knee brushed against mine under the table, and I didn't pull away. I should have stopped myself. Every rational part of me knew that stepping back was the right thing to do, but I didn't. I stayed. In that moment, it wasn't about right or wrong, it was about everything I had lost. I thought about how Kaylee had wrecked everything we had built, how she had made me into a joke, how she had chosen someone else over me, and in the end, a part of me wondered if I didn't deserve to take something for myself too. Melissa leaned in, her voice a whisper, warm against my ear. "We've both been through hell," she said softly. "Maybe we deserve something better." I didn't respond, couldn't, really. My mind was spinning, unsure if it was the alcohol or the weight of what she was suggesting. I felt the pressure of the decision on my shoulders, but before I could stop myself, I heard my own voice, faint and distant, say, "Maybe we do." She kissed me. At first it was quick and uncertain, but then it deepened, driven by all the anger and pain we had been carrying for months. This wasn't love, it was far from that. It was darker, perhaps revenge, or simply the desperate need to feel anything other than the emptiness we had been drowning in. I pulled away briefly, unsure if it was guilt or the last piece of morality in me trying to surface, but I hesitated. "Melissa, we shouldn't," I started, but she cut me off with a whisper. "They did this to us, Jacob." They made us feel like this. We deserve this. She was right, wasn't she? They had ruined us. They had taken everything we believed in and turned it to ash. So why shouldn't we take something for ourselves, just this once? Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my phone, opened the app, and pressed the button that would release the videos. With one click, everything changed. The footage of Kaylee and Trevor, caught in the act, was uploaded, sent out to the world. There was no turning back now. A strange satisfaction washed over me. They were going to pay. And then I let it happen. Melissa and I crossed that line. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, desperate, and filled with the kind of betrayal that had consumed us both for months. I wasn't thinking about the consequences, not then. All I cared about was the brief feeling of taking something back after having so much taken from me. When it was over, the room fell silent. Melissa lay beside me, breathing heavily, but neither of us spoke. There was no need. We both understood that what had just happened wasn't about us, it was about them, Kaylee and Trevor. We had reclaimed something, but it came at a cost. The next morning, the fallout began. The video spread faster than I ever could have imagined. I hadn't even considered how quickly something like that could go viral, but it did. By midday, everyone at the office knew. People were whispering, stealing glances at Trevor when he wasn't looking, smirking behind his back. Kaylee was feeling the effects too. Her co-workers were cold, distant, treating her like something dirty, something that needed to be erased. Trevor was the first to crack. The company couldn't afford a scandal, not with him at the center of it. He was fired quietly, but everyone knew what had happened. His reputation was ruined. Kaylee, too, faced the consequences. The partners at her firm couldn't overlook what had happened. She wasn't just an associate anymore, she was the woman who had been exposed in the most humiliating way. Their careers were collapsing, just like the lies they had built. And me. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt like I had won. But as I watched everything fall apart, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line too. In my pursuit of revenge, I had turned into something unrecognizable. I wasn't just the hurt husband anymore, I had become something darker, something colder. As I glanced over at Melissa, who sat next to me, staring blankly at her phone, I realized that revenge doesn't fill the emptiness left by betrayal. It only leaves you with the ashes of who you used to be. When I walked through the door that night, Kaylee was already there, pacing the living room, her eyes wide. The second she saw me, she erupted. "Why, Jacob? Why would you do this?" she screamed, her voice breaking under the weight of her anger. I stared at her, feeling nothing but disgust. Why? You cheated, Kaylee. Did you really think you could walk all over me, and I'd just take it? Her face twisted with frustration, and she threw her hands up, as if trying to piece together some defense. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it for us, for you. Trevor had influence, and I thought if I kept him happy, it would help your career. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You slept with my boss because you thought it would help me? You're pathetic, Kaylee. Nothing justifies what you did. Nothing. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. Just the cold realization that this marriage was over. That was the breaking point. The divorce was swift and emotionless. We sold the house, split the assets, and signed the papers. When it was all over, I packed my things and left the city. There was no reason to stay. I needed a fresh start, so I moved back to my hometown, where my old friends were, where I could reconnect with the life I had left behind. Going back felt like breathing fresh air after months of suffocating. I returned to my old job, not glamorous, but honest work. I fell back into a routine, started going to the gym again, spent more time with friends, and slowly began to feel like myself again. The pain of the betrayal faded with time. The memories of what Kaylee had done, the humiliation, the anger, they all became less important. I wasn't bitter anymore, I was just ready to move on. I realized that holding on to the pain wasn't going to help me, so I let it go. In my new life, I found peace. There were no more secrets, no more lies. I had learned a hard lesson, but it had made me stronger. Kaylee was just a chapter in my life that had ended, and I was ready for a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.